This meeting is being recorded.
Perfect. We'll turn it over to Kendra.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for starting off this last day of this amazing conference here with me today to talk about risk assessment and safety planning in stalking cases. My name is Kendra Eggleston. I am the Training and Campus Specialist at the Stalking Prevention Awareness and Resource Center, or SPARC for short. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat with your name, your title, and the organization or the campus that you are joining us from, so we can all get to know each other a little bit more and see who all is on this call with us today. I did drop a couple of links in the chat already. One, I just want to let you know that National Stalking Awareness Month is coming up in January, so we've got lots of resources for you if you want to check those out. And I also dropped the link for the risk assessment tool that we'll be using in this training today. So you can go ahead and access that if you want to follow along as we go through that risk assessment. I do want to mention that at SPARC, we are funded by the Office on Violence Against Women. And with that grant funding, we are the training and technical assistance provider specifically for the victimization of stalking. So we are here to help the helpers like you all who are doing the hard work to hold offenders accountable and to support victims and survivors of stalking. So if after today you want to talk more one-on-one with myself or anyone else from the SPARC team, specifically about Title IX cases that you're working on, safety planning with victims and survivors, if you want to talk about awareness and education programs to host on your campus or for your community, feel free to get in touch with myself or anyone else from SPARC. We can also provide a training for your campus or your organization. We are funded to do that, typically free of charge for you all. So we can do that virtually. We can come in person. Those are available 90-minute trainings up to multi-day, depending on your needs. So you can contact us to make those requests as well. You can also check out our website, stalkingawareness.org, where we already have a ton of free resources already built out for you. Before I joined the SPARC team, I accessed these resources all the time for the work that I was doing on my campus. So I sing SPARC's praises even before ever joining the team. But we have practitioner guides that are broken down by discipline. We have interactive training modules. We are not a direct victim service provider at SPARC. Again, our job is to help you all, to help the helpers, but we do have victim resources because inevitably victims and survivors do come to our website looking for information and resources. And those are also resources that you can use in your work as well. We have recorded webinars. So if you want to go back and look at our campus webinar or look at webinars that talk about specific populations or intersecting victimizations, you can check those out in our SPARchives online. You can also sign up for our newsletter. As an anti-stalking organization, we are not going to spam your inbox. We send out our newsletter about once quarterly to announce any upcoming public-facing webinars that we are hosting, any new resources that we've developed to help you in the work that you're doing, those types of announcements. And finally, we encourage you to check us out on social media. If you get our sense of humor at SPARC, our handle is @followuslegally. We give you consent to follow us. We are not going to be scared or suffering emotional distress if you're interacting and liking and sharing our posts, especially throughout the month of January. Again, just have to plug in Sam. So check us out at @followuslegally on all of our social media platforms. So first, let's just do a brief overview of what stalking is. Today, we're not going to be getting into details of the diversity of stalking behaviors and data and numbers around stalking. I am going to go over the Title IX definition, but if you want to go more into the definition of stalking and identifying stalking behaviors, again, you can request a training from SPARC and we can come and provide that for you, or you can check out our recorded webinars. But today I do at least want to provide you with the behavioral definition of stalking, and the behavioral definition matches our Title IX definition for campuses. And that is that stalking is a pattern of behavior. So we are looking for at least 2 or more behaviors. It is not a one-off event that is targeted at a specific person. So stalking is not a crime out of, where people are being victimized out of randomness or convenience. This is a targeted crime. and that these behaviors would cause a reasonable person to feel fear, and that could be the fear for their physical safety or the safety of others, or to suffer substantial emotional distress. And that substantial emotional distress can cover the fear of outcomes other than or in addition to physical harm. So the fear of having all of your academics sabotaged and maybe losing your scholarships or having to drop out of school or transfer schools. The fear of having all of your relationships sabotaged, or the fear of having your reputation ruined. So that substantial emotional distress. We have victims and survivors that are feeling like they are constantly under surveillance. They are having their lives are being sabotaged. They are constantly being threatened and intimidated. But substantial emotional distress can cover those outcomes in addition to or other than their physical safety. We also want to remind you that stalking is criminal. It is a crime that can be charged and prosecuted in all 50 states and DC, at the federal level, in the military justice system, and on most tribal lands. And it is a Title IX offense and a reportable offense under the Clery Act. It's important to start off by saying that because we have so many victims and survivors say things like, well, I didn't know I could file a Title IX report, or that I could contact police because someone kept showing up outside of my classes or at my dorm room, or someone kept making fake profiles to harass me on Instagram. I didn't know that I could make a report. So we start by saying that it is criminal. Stalking is also traumatic. There are potential lifelong impacts for victims and survivors. A lot of mental health impacts, including depression, anxiety, social dysfunction and isolation, as well as PTSD. And stalking is dangerous. It is a significant predictor of physical assault, sexual assault, and homicide. And yet, so oftentimes we hear stalking behaviors minimized or dismissed. We hear things like, oh, it's someone, being annoying or being frustrating. Like, yeah, that's difficult to deal with, but no one's like really getting hurt here. And we know that that's not true. These are some headlines that I pulled specifically from campus stalking cases, where we see campus sexual assault suspect pleads guilty to stalking. Repeat offender arrested for stalking and assault. Timeline of days before student's murder reveals stalking and extortion. And suspect stalked student for over an hour before murder. So these are headlines that show the reality and the dangers of stalking. So we know that stalking is associated with intimate partner homicide, as well as physical assault, sexual assault, explicit threats, property damage. And we know that 1 in 5 stalkers use weapons to either threaten or harm their victims and survivors. Stalking is also a lethality risk. These are the top 10 risk factors for intimate partner homicide, and perpetrated stalking is number 8 on the list. And when stalking is present, there is a 300% increased risk of intimate partner homicide. In fact, 3 out of 4 women who lose their life at the hands of their male partner were stalked in the year prior to their homicide. A researcher that we work with at Spark, Dr. Patrick Brady, puts it this way: stalking is homicide in slow motion. It is these behaviors and these tactics that add up and escalate over time. And I'm not saying that every stalking case ends in homicide or extreme violence, because that would not be accurate. But what I am saying is that constantly we see headlines like those ones that I just showed you. And it's at that point that we're looking backwards after homicide or after assault or after a sexual assault. And we're looking backwards and saying, oh, look, there was stalking, there was red flags of stalking all along. And oftentimes it's even been reported to multiple sources, but it wasn't handled appropriately or with the urgency that it deserved. And stalking really is one of the few crimes where early identification and appropriate response can prevent further violence and even death. So that's why it's so important that we recognize the dangers of stalking and that we know how to assess some of these risk factors and then appropriately safety plan around them. And we are going to use an evidence-based risk assessment tool today. But before we do, I do want to mention that Dr. Logan, who is the author of the research article and who developed the risk assessment tool that we're going to be using today, she says that victim perceptions of risk are a strong predictor of reassault, equal to or even better than risk management tools. So it's important that when victims and survivors are telling us that they are scared, that they are being threatened, that they feel this substantial emotional distress, that we are listening to and meeting them where they are at, because their perception of risk, they are the experts of their experience. And so they know what's really going on. So we need to be listening to what our victims and survivors are saying. Because we cannot use risk assessment tools to rule anyone out. Essentially, risk assessments are tools to identify warning signs that show that a person is a threat at a particular point in time. So we can't use risk assessments to rule someone out as a risk. We can't say like, oh, look, they don't show these signs at this particular point in time, so they're marked as safe. No. And as risk assessments or as stalking cases evolve, and as situations change, the risk will change over time. So it's important that we're not only doing risk assessments at one point in time, that we are continuing to reevaluate the risk as time goes on and as the situation changes, especially as our victims and survivors start to take self-protective measures. Things that they do to try to separate or distance themselves from their stalker is likely going to cause a reaction or a response or a change in behavior. So our risk assessment needs to evolve and change with the situation. The good thing is that a lot of our domestic violence assessments have indicators for stalking. They already have items that will assess for stalking behaviors. However, even on those domestic violence assessments, oftentimes stalking behaviors may still go unidentified or may still be underestimated. And also, we know that only about half of the time stalkers are former or current intimate partners. So the domestic violence risk assessment can be helpful in those cases to identify stalking behaviors. But if we have victims and survivors that are being stalked by a classmate, a former friend, an old roommate, things like that, our domestic violence risk assessments aren't going to be applicable because we're not necessarily using them in those cases. So we need to make sure that we know how to still perform risk assessments in all types of stalking cases. And these risk assessments allow us to increase accountability for offenders, but also it really helps us keep victims and survivors safety planning in a way that is relevant to their situation and can help increase their safety planning. So we're going to be looking at the Stalking and Harassment Assessment and Risk Profile, or SHARP, and you can access this through coercivecontrol.org or through the SPARK website. Again, I dropped that link for you in the chat. And about half of the folks, whenever I last checked the poll, had indicated that they've used some form of risk assessment in stalking cases. So feel free to put in the chat if you've used the SHARP or what other risk assessments that you have used for stalking cases. A lot of folks said that they've never used a risk assessment in a stalking case at all. So this is a really good tool to use, and we're going to go through this together looking at a case study. And I see someone already dropping in that they've used the SHARP, so we'd love to see that. And I'll tell you about the resources that the SHARP is going to provide us after we perform that risk assessment. It's going to give us a narrative report and risk profile, as well as some safety planning suggestions, and I'll show you what those look like. But before we perform the risk assessment, I just want to briefly go over what the 14 risk factors are that we are identifying through the SHARP. And you also have access to these slides. Those should already be available to you in this session in a PDF format. And that handout actually has additional slides for you. I wanted you to have more resources than we're actually able to fit into today's time. So you do have access to these slides as well as some extra slides for risk assessment and safety planning as well. So we're looking at these 14 risk factors. We're looking at these 4 different categories. Looking at the big picture, we are putting together the big picture, the timeline, and identifying what behaviors are going on. So the longer that a stalking case goes on, there's an increased risk for escalation and for continued and recurrent stalking. If there's been an escalation in behaviors, then that can increase the risk of physical safety, as well as if there's any triggers coming up. So that can be important anniversary dates or breakup dates. That could be a Title IX investigation. That could be serving someone with a no contact order, things like that that could potentially trigger the stalker and escalate their behavior. Looking at the nature and context of threats is important. How are these threats being communicated? Are they implicit? Are they explicit? Are they verbal? Are they being communicated through technology? And then also, what's the follow-through capability? It can be really scary to have a stalker tell their victim or survivor, I'm going to build an atom bomb, I'm going to drop it on your town, and I'm going to blow everyone up around you. And that's how I'm going to hurt you. That can be very scary and intimidating. But if we have a stalker that says, I live here in the state of Texas, so this is a plausible scenario. A stalker could say, I'm going to go to Walmart, I'm going to buy a gun, I'm going to come to your house on Friday after you've gotten off work, and I'm going to shoot you and your family while you're having dinner. The follow-through capability, the actual practicality of the stalker being able to follow through with that threat versus building an atom bomb increases the risk of the potential that they're going to follow through on that threat. Looking at stalker mindset, resistance and persistence, if our victims or survivors have done anything to show that they don't want this behavior to continue, that can be anything from an informal ignoring text messages or blocking phone calls to a formal serving a protective order or a no contact order. And then if the stalker continues to persist in their behaviors, that shows a level of increased risk because they do not care that they've been told to stop. Stalkers who have motives of wanting revenge or seeming to blame their victim or survivor for something, like for ruining their life or for being humiliated or being angry over a breakup or child custody, those types of motives for wanting to blame and revenge can increase the risk. And then proxy stalking. If the stalker is using third parties in any way to monitor their victim or survivor, to contact them, to threaten them, or to cause them harm, increases the risk to our victims and survivors. Looking at stalker history, if the stalker has a history of abuse to either the victim or to others, that's going to increase the risk for further abuse. If the stalker has any type of fascination with or increased knowledge around or training or experience with guns or weapons. So that could be stalkers that are military or ex-police officers. That could also be the stalker who enjoys going to the shooting range and does jujitsu on the weekends. They have an increased knowledge around those factors that they could then use to harm their victim or survivor. And then also being aware of any criminal history, any mental health issues, and any substance abuse issues that our stalker has, because that can give insight into their mindset, their mood, and the potential for increasing or that escalation of behavior. And then finally, victim vulnerability. It's important to assess what our victim is afraid of, what their fears are, or that substantial emotional distress. What impacts are they experiencing? Are they having their reputation being threatened? Are they having their academics being sabotaged? Is the stalker interfering with their relationships? What's the impact on the victim or survivor? If our stalker has any particular knowledge or expertise with technology, then they can use that to threaten or harm their victim or survivor. Or if our victim or survivor has any kind of lack of knowledge or inexperience or naivete when it comes to technology. And then other risk factors that we're looking at that increase our victims' vulnerability related to housing. The case study that we're going to look at, our victim was living in campus housing, and we'll see how the stalker was able to get in even through a locked door from other students, scanning him in or following other students through. If they work together, that's going to increase the contact between the stalker and the victim. It's going to decrease the likelihood that they're able to disengage or cut off contact. They're reliant upon their stalker for anything like finances or housing. If they are particularly isolated or if their relationships are being cut off, that is all going to increase the vulnerability for our victims and survivors. So these are the 14 risk factors that we are going to use the SHARP to assess. And feel free to kind of start, as we watch this case study together, start to take note of maybe some of the risk factors that you see. So if you are not familiar with the case of Lauren McCluskey, we're going to watch just about 6.5 minutes of her case. You can go and watch the full Nightline episode. You can also watch ESPN did a really good investigation that's available on YouTube. So you can watch her whole case. We're going to watch just a brief part of her case today to be able to use for the SHARP. I do just want to be very upfront. Lauren McCluskey, if you're not aware of her story, she does lose her life at the hands of her stalker. So I just want to remind you to please take care of yourself during this time. If you are not in the place to be able to watch this video, that's totally fine. I just recommend muting or turning off the screen for about 7 minutes and then coming back. So just please take care of yourself. I'm going to turn off my video to help with streaming, and feel free to take any notes or things like that that you'd like to, because we're going to be using information that we pull from this video to do our SHARP assessment together. So let me turn my video off. And if there's any problems with hearing sound or anything like that, someone just jump off mute and let me know. But here we go.
It was fall, the beginning of a new year, her very last one at her beloved university. Lauren was at a bar with friends when she met a man. He said his name was Sean Fields, that he was 28 and working as a bouncer. The relationship quickly grew serious. Friends said he'd often visit her in her dorm. But friends grew concerned, telling housing staff Lauren was in an unhealthy relationship. Regina remembers Lauren telling her about her boyfriend.
What made me feel uncomfortable was how he would be calling every single time whenever we would be out, and she would say, "I have to get this." I was like, I'm not necessarily comfortable with how he's treating you. Being kind of controlling.
When did you first hear your daughter talk about this man?
In September. He was very charming. He tried to sweep her off her feet. I was concerned that he was a little older than her. I didn't know his
You thought he was a little older than
Yes,
her, not...
yeah.
But he was actually 37 years old, something 21-year-old Lauren discovered when she Googled him. Sean wasn't his real name either. It was Melvin Rowland. And most horrifying of all, Rowland had been convicted for attempted forcible sexual abuse and enticing a minor over the internet in 2004 and had been jailed twice since. In a 2012 parole hearing, he seemed to question if he was rehabilitated.
I know I have that capability of reoffending.
Just over 4 weeks after first meeting him, Lauren confronted Rowland with what she had learned and broke up with him. But she let him spend the night and borrow her car the next day to run errands.
And so when your daughter tells you, this guy I've been dating is a registered sex offender, what was your reaction?
I said, "You're doing exactly the right thing to break up with him."
Were you afraid for her at that point in any way?
I was concerned.
The next day, Lauren tells her mom that Rowland wants her to meet him at the stadium parking lot to return her car. Jill, now worried, calls campus police.
I'm worried that he's dangerous. He was lying to her, and he's actually a sexual offender and lied about his age and things like that. I would just like someone to accompany her. I will give her a call. Did you want me to give you a call back or? Yeah, if you could give me a call back, that'd be good. Okay, what was your name? Jill.
Campus police do call Lauren that afternoon. Lauren tells dispatch that Rowland has now decided to drop the car off closer to her dorm.
Okay, do you feel comfortable with him doing that? I know your mom was really concerned about it. Yeah, I think it's okay. Okay, because if it's all right with you, I mean, we're here 24/7. I'm super cool. You could come hang out here and have him drop it off here.
But Lauren calls back.
I was wondering if I could get a ride to the stadium. That's okay. Definitely, yeah, for sure.
An officer accompanies her, and they successfully retrieve her car. Dispatch calls Jill back to let her know.
So thanks so much. I just wanted to make sure that was happening, that because I feel like he has a little bit of control over her. Oh, definitely. You know, that something bad could happen.
So you felt safe at that point, like my daughter's in a good place, in good hands.
Right, sure.
She'll be protected.
Absolutely.
But things soon ramp up. Just 2 days later, on October 12th, Lauren calls campus police back about some texts she's received.
I got a text about, asking if I wanted to go to his funeral. And I think they're trying to lure me somewhere.
Campus police begins a formal investigation this day, and an officer calls her back. But the next day, Lauren's situation gets even scarier.
I'm being blackmailed for money. It's a photo of me and my ex. They're threatening to send it out to everyone, and she's asking for $1,000.
Dispatch relays that Lauren's being blackmailed to an officer who makes contact with Lauren. She eventually goes in person down to the campus police station, but she seems unsatisfied and worried, so she calls Salt Lake City police.
I wasn't sure how long they were going to take to.
Are you in line for an officer to call you?
But because she lives on campus in university jurisdiction, they transfer her back to campus police.
I called 911 because I was just concerned, and I wasn't sure. I thought it might help speed things up. Do you know when an arrest would be made?
You can talk to an officer if you want. I can arrange that if you want that.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good.
That arrest was never made. In fact, officers never even went to see Melvin Rowland. And an investigation into the extortion charges didn't start until a week after Lauren reported it. The detective assigned to her case was off. Lauren told her mom she felt like she was all on her own, unprotected by those tasked with keeping her safe.
One thing she did tell me, feels like I'm bothering them because she was calling so much. And then I remember telling her, it's their job to listen to you, if you're complaining.
But they weren't listening.
No, they weren't. They weren't taking her seriously.
And Lauren's friends reported to campus staff that Rowland had talked about wanting to get Lauren a gun. What no one, including campus police, knew yet was that Rowland was on parole. What should have been an automatic red flag for law enforcement. Campus police wasn't sharing information with Salt Lake City police, and the parole board never knew anything about Lauren's complaints, a communication gap which would prove fatal.
And they missed the fact that he was on parole.
Lauren had no experience in law enforcement or computers, and yet she was able, with a laptop computer, to find out all of this information. He was a sex offender. He lied about his age. He lied about his name. And yet the police couldn't make this additional leap and discover his parole status, which is public information.
Okay. So
It was
with just this little bit of information that we have about Lauren's case, we're going to look at the SHARP assessment together. All right, I'm going to reshare my screen. And let's see, hopefully. Okay, so if you go to the SPARK website, stalkingawareness.org, if you go to resources and SHARP, this will take you to a page that will link you to the actual assessment. This is just making sure that you are aware that technology can be monitored. So if you are working with victims and survivors, making sure that we're doing this from a device that is not being monitored. This is also just going over confidentiality information. I will let you know. So the narrative report and the risk assessment and the safety planning information that this is going to give us, for confidentiality purposes, it does not save any of that information. So if you do a risk assessment and later you want to be able to go back and see what those risk assessments were or look at those safety planning strategies, you need to make sure to either save the information in a PDF or to print it off, because once you click out of this screen, then it's not going to save any of this information. And that's, again, for victim and survivor confidentiality. So this box is just saying that we understand all of that information, and then it's going to start asking us some questions. I will say here at the bottom, the good thing with the SHARP, the only piece of data that they're collecting is how often this assessment is being used with a victim or survivor in a real case, or how often it's just being used to practice or test. So you can go into the Sharp and use this as many times as you like, either with a case that you're familiar with or looking up a case like Lauren's or others and practice it so you can get familiar with the questions. This assessment is 48 questions long, which can seem like a lot. But when you are familiar with it, once you've gone through it a time or two, and when you're sitting there with a victim or survivor and they're telling you their story and answering these questions with you, you can get through it in about 10, 15 minutes. So that is going to ask either, yes, I'm seeking information about something that is happening to me or someone I know, or no, I'm just practicing or testing this assessment. So we're going to say that we're testing this assessment. So these questions here, I'm going to go through these first questions because these are just kind of the background information, but then I would love for you to engage in the chat as we go through the assessment questions and provide what your answers would be based on Lauren's case and the information that we just saw. So we know that we're looking at a male offender. He lied about his name, but his name is Melvin Rowland. He also lied about his age, but we know he is 37 years old. Our victim's name is Lauren McCluskey. She's female. She is 21 years old. We know that they are separated. I think that the assessment does a good job of providing examples of what the different relationships might be, but they are ex-partners. We're going to say that we're professional on behalf of the target. We'll say that we're school professional, campus professional, and this is happening in Utah. So these are the only questions that I'm going to low-hanging fruit for you and answer. And now we're going to get into the assessment questions. And I want you all to answer. These first questions are going to be yes or no questions, and then we're going to get into some scale questions. But our first question is, has Melvin Rowland been tracking, following, or monitoring Lauren McCluskey in any way? Yes, no, or suspected? All right, I already got the engagement. Perfect, thank you. So yes. Next question, has Melvin Rowland repeatedly invaded Lauren McCluskey's life, privacy by initiating unwanted contact with Lauren? See some more yeses. Has Melvin Rowland more than one time intimidated or scared Lauren McCluskey through threats, property damage, threatening or actual harm of pets, or other means? And I see some yes, especially with that threatening to release that image. Has Melvin Rowland significantly and directly interfered with Lauren McCluskey's life, spreading rumors, publicly humiliating Lauren, jeopardizing her job, interfering with finances or housing? And I see yeses. Okay, so we've addressed all of these. We use a framework called the SLY categories or the SLY framework to look at the different behaviors of stalking. You can see that in our recorded webinars. But when we look at surveillance, life invasion, intimidation, and interference through sabotage, those are our 4 categories. Each of these questions has addressed those 4 categories. So we see behaviors from all 4 categories of our SLY framework from just these 4 questions alone. Our next question, has Melvin physically or sexually assaulted Lauren while he has been stalking, harassing, or threatening her? There might be a little delay on my chat too, so. Good point, Whitney. So this is a question that comes up exactly, Whitney and Alexandra. A lot of kind of the first impact is like, well, no, there's not been physical assault, but or sexual assault, but sexual violence, sexual assault, those non-consensual images, even the threat of sending those out, that is sexual violence. Absolutely. So we could say yes for that one. Has Melvin forcibly kept Lauren from leaving or held Lauren against her will, caused her to have a serious accident, physically assaulted her friends or family, or seriously attacked Lauren in other ways? And at this point in the story, we would say no. So we don't see any physical attacks or causing her to have an accident, but likely attempted when he was dropping off the car. Good point, Alexandra. So if this one had a category of suspected, we could say suspected. You'll also see as we go through some of these questions how important context is. So if you had the victim or survivor sitting here with you and you ask, have you experienced sexual violence? The victim or survivor may say, well, no, he hasn't sexually attacked me, he hasn't raped me, but then providing that context, well, the threats of sharing that image is sexual violence. Or if she says, well, no, he's never kept me, he's never physically kept me from leaving somewhere. Okay, well, why did he spend the night after after y'all broke up? Was that something that you wanted him to do? Did you invite him to stay the night? Were you coerced into that? Were you afraid of what would happen if you didn't let him stay the night, if you made him leave? And if she says, well, yeah, I couldn't kick him out, I was afraid he was going to, do something worse. Okay, well, then asking those follow-up questions and getting that context is really important in stalking cases and when doing these risk assessments. So this one, we could go either way. I don't want to speak for Lauren. We'll go taking her car, even with consent, was likely a separation tactic. Absolutely. In a way of maybe even providing like some victim blaming. Well, she let me stay the night. She let me use her car. So I thought she wanted this to keep going or whatnot. So those are some really good points. So we could say yes on this one. So we could say, held her against her will, forcibly kept her. But we don't see causing her to have an accident, attacking friends or family members, or other types of attacks. But those are good context pieces to be able to follow up with. Okay, so for this question, I'm going to put in a date that is about a month prior to today, and you'll see why. If you're doing this risk assessment, obviously you want to put in the correct date that this actually started happening. But since this happened back in 2018, if I put in the actual date, then it's going to say it's been going on for like 7 years. So we'll say that it started November 10th of 2025, and you'll see, because it's going to confirm, and this is for that bigger picture, that the stalking has been going on for about a month. So we'll say yes. Okay, so some more questions for you all. Does Melvin Rowland regularly contact or harass Lauren McCluskey in more than one way? You see a yes, yeah, yes. Does Melvin Rowland bother Lauren at more than one location other than contacting her through the phone? And it's a little bit tricky, Katrina saying yes. Again, seeing the bigger picture, the full story, you see that he is following her around campus. He's going into buildings where she has classes. He's coming to her dorm where she has athletic practices. So he is definitely bothering her at more than one location. Before and after the end of the relationship. Absolutely, yes. He was even following her the night that they met. When you hear the background of the story, he's following her around the bar. And so he's almost kind of like surveilling her and seemingly picking out someone that he sees could be a potential victim. Has Melvin Rowland's behavior increased in frequency or severity in recent months or weeks? And I think that's what Alexandra was maybe saying is yes. It's increased in frequency, yes. During the relationship, that controlling behavior, and then absolutely after the breakup. So that's looking at the intensity. Again, these are going to be some questions where you want to be asking Lauren these types of questions. In a typical month, how many days does Melvin Rowland initiate unwanted contact with Lauren? I would say in a full month, pretty much every day. She also, whenever you look at the call logs, she's calling the police every single day. She's forwarding screenshots and emails and text messages every day. So we see that she's getting this contact constantly. How many days does Melvin directly approach or confront Lauren? This is difficult to tell from the video. We can say about half the time. It may be more, it may be less. This is less important for the number of risk factors in this. You'll see in the narrative report where this information comes up. It helps it to just put it into that big picture. But I think that we could safely say in a typical month that Melvin significantly interferes with Lauren's life daily. We have a college student who is constantly calling community PD, constantly calling campus PD. She even goes into the campus PD in person after practice on a Saturday. These are not things that someone is doing because something is a little frustrating or annoying. He is significantly interfering with her life on a daily basis. And we know that they've only broken up once. They did still have that contact after, but there was only one breakup, one separation. Okay. Has Melvin Rowland left objects, made gestures, or said things that felt threatening but were not direct threats? What do y'all think? And what do y'all think? What do y'all think some of those, he definitely has. What do y'all think some of those those indirect threats might be? He directly threatened to share non-consensual, yes, that funeral invitation. That's that like symbolic violence. And again, in the full video, you see that it's also his friends that are texting her and inviting her somewhere and like kind of blaming her, saying, oh, he's been in a terrible accident and it's your fault. Also, I would think encouraging her to get a gun. He also gets her a can of pepper spray. So that's and this is not someone that wants a gun, but he's really pushing it and keeps bringing it up. So to me, that would be threatening, especially if I said, I'm not comfortable with that. That's not something I want. I'm not allowed to have it on campus. And he continues to push. That feels threatening. Has Melvin Rowland threatened to physically hurt or kill Lauren McCluskey? Yeah, the assumption she needs to protect herself against him. Absolutely. We don't see any explicit threats of physical violence. We do know that there is physical violence because he does murder her, but he has not explicitly threatened physical violence or harm against her at this point. So he also is not described in detail how he plans to physically harm her. Has Melvin Rowland threatened, harassed, stalked, or assaulted others close to Lauren, like her children, her friends, family members, or coworkers? And this might be a question where some context would be helpful. He hangs out in her dorm room or in like kind of the common areas of her dorm, even when she's away at class or when she's at practice. So is that stalking? It could be, if he's monitoring her friends or contacting her friends as a way to either kind of implicitly threaten her or show her I have this access to you, possibly. So we don't know for sure. We don't see like direct threats. But again, asking some of those other questions like, well, how do your friends feel about him constantly being in the dorm room? We know that he was staying there most nights and things like that. So has he ever contacted your friends? How did they feel about that? Has Melvin threatened to destroy property, harm pets, or to sabotage Lauren in any other ways? Oh, Alexandra, yeah, it's all implicit with given the history with the criminal, legal, maybe intentional. We also know he's on parole. He can't get a gun. Why is he encouraging his girlfriend to get a gun? Is he really wanting her to get the gun? Is he wanting to have access to a weapon? She knows he's on parole. So that's extremely threatening. Absolutely. We do know that Melvin is threatening to sabotage Lauren with that non-consensual intimate image distribution. I would say indirectly threatening Lauren with a gun. She has said that she does not want a gun. And if he continues to push that, then, you could ask her those questions, but I would say that that's a threat. We don't know for sure if Melvin has threatened to harm himself. But again, that funeral text, there was texts about him being a really bad car accident, that kind of almost symbolic threat to harm himself, I would say could be a threat, has threatened to harm himself. Has he ever made a threat and then did exactly what was threatened or taken steps to carry out a threat made to Lauren? We do know that she Venmo'd him $1,000 twice in order to not have that image shared. So that I would say is, he's made a threat. I'm going to share these images if you don't do this. And then he's taken steps to actually go through with that threat. It doesn't have to be the threat of physical violence, but he has made steps to carry out threats to Lauren. Has Melvin had other people, like his friends or family members, threaten, harass, intimidate, stalk, or attack Lauren? And again, yes, it's also his friends that were the ones sending her those messages of, he's been in a bad accident, it's your fault, and inviting her to the funeral. So some more questions. Has Melvin's actions made Lauren feel afraid or concerned for her safety? Say extremely. Has Melvin's actions made Lauren concerned for the safety of her children, family members, friends, and or coworkers? I don't know for sure. I would say at least somewhat. Her friends are seeing these red flags. Her friends are also making reports to campus housing and to campus police. So she could be afraid that if he knows that they're also making those reports, I would say probably somewhat or extremely, again, with his criminal history, also knowing that he's a sex offender, at least somewhat would be my guess on that one. How much have Melvin Rowland's actions contributed to Lauren making significant life changes for safety reasons? I would say extremely. Again, we have a college student that is contacting the police daily, multiple times a day. She is changing her routines. She's missing practices. She's becoming more isolated. She's doing a lot of things to try to keep herself safe. She's calling and following up, asking about when an arrest is going to be made. And so these are not things that someone does because they are not feeling extremely threatened or intimidated. Does Lauren believe that Melvin is capable of harming her or others close to her? Say extremely. And is Lauren afraid or concerned about a significant financial or social impact? And again, we know that sextortion, those non-consensual images, that's probably an extreme fear. We can hear that fear in her voice when she's calling and making those reports. We'll go through a couple more. For the sake of time, we won't go through all of the questions, but I will show you what the resource looks like that it provides for you at the end. But has Melvin Rowland been directly and clearly notified that the harassment and stalking is unwanted, informally or formally? And she has asked him to stop. She has blocked numbers. We know that unfortunately, a formal notification never happened. She was asking for an arrest to be made, and there was never any follow-up. But she did informally notify him that she did not want that behavior to continue. And we do know that he continued even after he knew that she wanted it to stop. And is there a court order preventing Melvin from contacting, harassing, or being violent towards Lauren? And unfortunately, there's not, because again, no arrest or protective order was ever served. So this again has some more questions. It's asking about these risk factors. It's asking about the controlling behaviors, the experience with weapons, the criminal history, self-harm, mental health issues, the different ways that he contacts her. So it asks all of these questions and these risk factors. Let me stop sharing my screen for a second because I'm going to get back to our PowerPoint so I can show you. Okay. All right, hopefully you can see my screen again here. So it's going to give you two different documents. And again, both of these documents, if you're wanting to keep them and refer back to them, make sure that you save them as a PDF or you print them out. If you're providing a copy of those to the victim or survivor, make sure that you're doing that in the way that is safest for their situation. But the first document that it's going to give you is a narrative report and the risk profiles, those 14 risk factors. So the narrative report, I have actually found really helpful when working on campuses, especially when doing Title IX interviews with victims and survivors. The victims and survivors that I have worked with going through those interviews, it can be really intimidating. It can be traumatic. It can be really anxiety inducing, where the students that I worked with would say, I don't feel like I have my timeline in order, or I don't know if I've remembered everything. Did I remember to include everything? Did I ask my follow-up questions that I wanted to ask? So actually doing the SHARP ahead of a Title IX interview was really helpful for me on campuses, because it kind of helps get your ducks in a row, right? And the student feels comfortable or more confident that they have all of that information there with them for the interview. So it gives that big picture, how long it's been going on, that duration and intensity and frequency. We can see, how often he's been interfering, how often he's been contacting her or approaching her in person, if there's been any escalation or any triggers. So it gives this good big picture, full narrative report. And these are just a couple of screenshots. These reports are much longer, but you'll see then it gets to the risk profile. And those 14 risk factors that we went over together before doing the SHARP assessment, if we had finished the full SHARP, you would see that 13 of the 14 risk factors were flagged in Lauren's case. So if anyone had ever done a risk assessment with Lauren and been able to properly safety plan with her, they would have seen that there were a lot of red flags in her case that shows a risk of escalation of violence, of continued and recurring stalking, and of physical harm. So it'll go into each of those risk factors and what those risk factors look like, what it increases the risk of, if it's physical harm, if it's social damage, psychological damage. And then the second document it's going to give us is safety planning suggestions. So if you've never done safety planning, this is a really great place to start. We also have resources on our website that I'll show you here in just a little bit. But it's going to give us some safety planning suggestions based on Lauren's case. So it'll give us some really good, I think it does a good job of providing some documentation tips. Documentation in stalking cases can always be tricky. A lot of times victims and survivors will say, like, I didn't even know how to start collecting evidence or show what was going on. And so this gives some really good documentation tips. And something that we encourage when using a SHARP assessment with a victim or survivor is having the victim or survivor do it with preferably a victim advocate. They may not feel comfortable doing it with you, and that's okay, but encourage them to do it with a friend or a family member, someone that they feel comfortable with and trust, because these questions can be triggering. Also, on these assessments, it will pop up with the sentence that says, this suggests that Melvin Rowland is stalking you. And that might be the first time that that person has even thought about stalking. They may not have even, again, we don't always identify stalking, and victims and survivors have a hard time sometimes identifying what's happening to them as stalking. So this may be the first time that they've even thought of that word, or this may be kind of that confirmation, like, I really knew something was off. I've been kind of freaked out, and now this confirms kind of my worst fear. Now I kind of have to face it. So just be prepared to process the feelings with the victim or survivor if you're doing this assessment with them, or encourage them to have someone that they trust and feel comfortable with as they go through this assessment if they're not going to do it with you. So we're going to watch just a little bit more of Lauren's case, just so you see kind of the end part of this case. Again, I'm going to turn off my video to help with the streaming, and I'm going to play. This one is just a little under a minute. So if you are not in the space to watch the video, just pause and mute for about 1 minute.
It's now Monday, October 22nd.
How concerned were you at this point now?
I had a false sense of security. The police were on the lookout. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that this individual could hang out at her dorm.
But Rowland was at her dorm, seemingly lying in wait, hanging out with some of her friends. At about 8 p.m. that night, after getting out of class on her walk home, Lauren calls her mom just to chat like they often did.
She was talking about class projects that she was working on. It was just a fantastic conversation.
Thinking about next semester classes too, she mentioned.
She was planning her future. She was excited about her future.
Totally.
And then all of a sudden she yells, no, no, no.
Next.
Okay, so just to give you kind of some information, on October 22nd, Lauren was leaving her night class. She was on the phone with her mom, and Rowland snuck up on her. He grabbed her. She dropped her phone. Her mom heard her yelling, no, 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 and then heard her being dragged across the parking lot. And that's the last time that they were able to talk. Melvin dragged Lauren to a car that he had borrowed from a friend and driven to campus, and put her in the car and shot her in the back seat 7 times and killed her. Someone then, actually an acquaintance, someone that Melvin met on a dating app, picked him up from campus to go on a first date, not knowing at all what had just happened. And she actually later went into the police station and said, I saw him on the news knowing that he was wanted, and basically told her story, said I didn't know, and helped turn him in. Essentially, they went on a manhunt for him. He ran into a church, barricaded himself inside of a church, and shot himself. So he was never able to be held accountable because he took his own life after taking Lauren's. After Lauren's case, there were 2 reviews that an independent review and report was conducted on the response of the Lauren McCluskey case. And there were a lot of findings that came up with what went wrong in her case. And the review revealed lots of things, including that officers missed that Rowland was on parole. So there were actually no policies and procedures requiring that campus police check offender status. So they did not check his parole status. Lauren was the one that actually found that out. Campus was understaffed and undertrained. So the person that was assigned to her case was off. And that email wasn't even ever opened until after Lauren was murdered. So there was a lack of training. There was no lethality assessment completed, no risk assessment was ever performed, and no safety planning. The University of Utah Department of Public Safety did not have a working relationship with the Center for Student Wellness or with victim advocates. And that first initial contact that Lauren called campus PD should have immediately been followed up with an advocate. And most of those contacts with Lauren were made over the phone or via email. You even heard Lauren in the video where the dispatcher says, "Do you want me to have an officer call you back?" And you can kind of hear her sigh and like, she's a little dejected and it's like, yeah, I guess. Right. And she knows that that call may never be followed up, or that it just demonstrates a lack of urgency and care for Lauren's case. It also leaves out context and the ability. You saw as we go through some of those sharp questions, how important it is to ask those follow-up questions, or to have Lauren ask follow-up questions and provide context. And when you do things just briefly on a phone call or in an email, it really leaves out room and ability to be able to ask those follow-up questions and get the full information of the story. And we also know that information wasn't shared between the departments, and it's vital that that information is shared between campus PD, between the Salt Lake City PD, and the parole board. There were no ways to share the calls for service, and University of Utah Public Safety did not know that she had requested that security escort, and that Lauren's friends had made multiple reports through housing staff about their unhealthy relationship, and that Roland was wanting to bring a gun to campus. Those weren't communicated to UUPS or a behavior intervention team, and they weren't handled in a timely or urgent manner at all. And this is a quote from the report that says, "As we examined the totality of this troubling event, we discovered that there were several indications that Lauren McCluskey was in trouble. Had victim advocates been engaged, Lauren might not have been left to assess the dangerousness of her situation on her own. There were shortcomings both systemically and individually. There were several instances where the lack of coordination was evident within UUPS, within housing, and among various campus departments. While the university has developed systems and programs to respond to student welfare issues, those systems were not engaged nor utilized." So it's important that we learn from Lauren's case and hopefully do better going forward. I do want to mention that Lauren's parents have set up the Lauren McCluskey Foundation. They do a lot of advocate and activist work around campus safety, around healthy relationships and stalking. So you can check out resources and information on that foundation at laurenmccluskey.org. So going over just a few big picture tips for responding to victims and survivors and doing some safety planning, it's important to remember some of the challenges in our stalking cases. Again, it is a contextual crime. A lot of times we have to have that context to understand the dangers and the risks and where the threat is coming from. It is a pattern of behavior. We have to identify stalking as a course of conduct, and individual acts themselves may not be criminal. It's up to us to maintain a stalking lens and put together that course of conduct to identify a stalking pattern of behavior. Victims and survivors may not identify what's happening to them as stalking, so that impacts their help-seeking behaviors and their reporting decisions. It's difficult to collect evidence and to document stalking behavior, so we have some resources to help you do that. And stalking cases require long, resource-intensive responses, whether that's going through Title IX cases, going through the criminal justice system, or just safety planning and processing and emotionally healing from a stalking case. These are long and resource-intensive responses. And on campuses, we have additional challenges. We know that 18 to 24-year-olds experience the highest rates of stalking among adults. So that's right there with our college population. Those shared social circles, oftentimes students interact with the same people. It also has that limited geographic space where students are going to school and eating and studying and working out and socializing all on campus, that increases their vulnerability, the access that their stalker could potentially have to them. Those events and locations are open to all students, staff, community members. A lot of times events, or even just having someone being able to walk on campus. Campuses are public spaces, so that increases that vulnerability. Again, those jurisdictional challenges. Something happens on campus, do you call campus PD? Do you call city PD? Are they going to be talking to each other and sharing information and communication? So that can be challenging. And oftentimes with college students, we see that conflation with bullying. And someone said sometimes it's conflation with just being uncomfortable when they're genuinely feeling unsafe. Absolutely. So we may be conflating the behaviors with, oh, that's just immature romantic pursuit, or, oh, it's someone just bullying. And maybe that's annoying or frustrating, but it's not dangerous or scary. Or also, yeah, conflating the victim or survivor's fear with like, oh, they're just kind of exaggerating, or they're just being uncomfortable, when it's actual fear. So making sure that we are listening to our victims and survivors. That's a good point, Alexandra. Thank you. So these stalking cases require a coordinated campus response. It is on all of us, regardless of our role, to be able to identify stalking behaviors, to know where to make those referrals, to know our reporting requirements, and to know how to make sure that we are getting students in contact with all aspects of campus and community supports and resources that could potentially help them out. Also recognizing that that first contact is critical. If you're the first person that someone discloses stalking behaviors to, the way that you respond to that can impact the way that that victim or survivor processes their experience and can impact their potential future help-seeking behaviors or reporting behaviors. Make sure that you know where to refer students on campus or in their community to get additional support and resources, knowing how to document evidence, knowing how to collect that evidence, and again, preparing for the long haul. Of course, we do want to be aware of those mandatory reporting requirements. Most folks on campus are mandatory reporters, so making sure that if someone is starting to disclose a stalking situation, that you let that student know, okay, I am going to have to make a Title IX report about that, but doing that in a trauma-informed way. Making sure that they know what's going into the report, making sure that they know what's going to happen after. You're going to get an email from a Title IX coordinator. This is what's going to happen, so that's not happening unexpectedly. And again, making sure that we are providing referrals and resources along with making those reports. In the handout, you will see that we have some tips for identifying risk. Again, I totally understand it's not always possible to be able to do the full 48-item sharp risk assessment. So we do have some questions that are tips to be able to start identifying risks that are pulled from each of those categories of our risk factors. So that's available for you in the handouts. And it's important that we are safety planning with victims and survivors when we're doing these risk assessments. Much like risk assessments, safety planning is not a one-time deal. It's really more of a verb than a noun. It's safety planning rather than providing a safety plan, because it's something that we need to be actively doing with victims and survivors. As their situation changes, as they start to take self-protective measures, their stalking situation is going to change. And so our safety plans need to evolve with the situation. These are ways to practically decrease risk, but we want to make sure that we're balancing physical risk and emotional safety, because so oftentimes victims and survivors of stalking say, like, I had to change so much about my life. I had to make myself so small to make the stalking stop. And that can really cause psychological damage and social damage. So making sure that we're providing ways that balance physical and emotional well-being. It's important to recognize that most victims and survivors, 78% of victims and survivors, will take some kind of self-protective action on their own. So it's important to ask, what have you already done? Before I start giving you all of my safety planning strategies, what are some things that you've already done to keep yourself safe? And what do you need my help doing? Do you need help filing a Title IX report? Do you need help getting a no contact order? Do you need help switching housing or changing your class schedule? What can I help advocate for you? And then what are you not willing to do? We know that victims and survivors may do things that already feel safe or or not able to make certain changes. Maybe they have to stay enrolled in a certain number of hours, or they can't change their working situation, or they don't want to move housing because their suite mates know what's going on and their RA knows what's going on. And so they want to stay in their housing situation. So changing to emergency housing may not be the best situation for them. So making sure that we're safety planning around factors that are already working well for our students or things that we're not able to change. And we always want to recommend, if at all possible, to completely cut off contact with the stalker. Any engagement that our victim or survivor has with the stalker is going to reinforce their behavior. Stalkers want to get engagement, even negative, from their victims and survivors. So anything that our victim does to reinforce that contact is going to potentially increase the risk that the stalking continues. However, we do know that victims and survivors sometimes have to maintain contact. Maybe they can't cut off contact because, again, they work together, or they have a shared kids in custody, or they have a situation where they're not able to cut off contact, or they're maintaining contact with their stalker as a safety strategy. Victims and survivors will say, like, yes, I pick up the phone every time my stalker calls, because if I don't answer their call, then they're showing up in person and they're physically violent. So it's not practical. It's not a safety planning strategy for me to block that phone number and to disengage completely. Staying in some sort of contact is actually a safety strategy. So making sure we're safety planning around that context. Here's just a few ways to start safety planning at home. Something that can help is informing neighbors, landlords, housemates, resident advisors, suite mates. That can be embarrassing or shameful. We don't want to make a victim or survivor do anything that they're not comfortable with, but the more people that do know what's going on and have eyes on this person can help increase safety. Making sure that they have access to any resources, finances, documentation, and emergency resources if they need to make an escape. Installing personal alarms or changing locks or any other type of security systems. And then also photographing property damage as a way of documenting evidence, but also, if possible, documenting property before any damage does happen. If property damage is a potential risk in that situation, taking before and after pictures can help. So if they live in a dorm room, maybe do a quick video of their dorm room as it stands now. So if property or their car or something like that. So if property damage does happen down the line, then we can potentially have a before and after. Safety planning at school or at the workplace, again, sharing information with security or with anyone else that is safe for the victim or survivor to do so. Changing routines and routes if at all possible. Having an accompaniment, whether that's a friend or a family member, or calling that non-emergency police contact. Most campuses have some sort of escort service. Ensuring that we're not posting any directory information or class schedules that we don't need to. Providing copies of no contact orders or Title IX reports to folks that can potentially help increase safety. Saving voicemails, texts, or emails, again, documenting that evidence. And then working with building security, if possible, to get any access logs. So if it is a student that's using their key card for access, getting those logs or potential security camera footage for document that type of evidence. And we do have a resource on our website for specifically campus safety planning that is free. You can check that out. But it's just important, some basic considerations to remember is, again, trusting those victim instincts. They are the experts of their situation. So making sure that we're listening to what our victims and survivors are telling us. Our risk assessments and safety planning should evolve as the case evolves. Making sure that we're considering what the stalker's next tactic could be or what their reaction is going to be. If our victim or survivor blocks the phone number, how do we think that the stalker is going to potentially react? Is that going to make them decide to give up and say, oh, look, they blocked my phone number, so now I'm going to give up and like go be a productive member of society? Or are they going to say, oh, look, they blocked my phone number, now I'm really mad and I'm going to show up in person? So making sure that we're anticipating that reaction. And again, balancing that safety and emotional freedom as well. We do have a short handbook for stalking victims and survivors that's translated in multiple languages on our website. This can be a great starting off point when working with students and providing some information. You can print this out and give this to them. Encourage you to have this in your offices, but you can also direct victims and survivors to this handbook. We also have a stalking incident and behavior log. Again, collecting evidence can feel overwhelming. These behaviors add up really quickly. These logs fill up really quickly, but this can be a really great way to start documenting every time we see contact, someone shows up, we get those threats. And we can also document who we reported it to. So this can really help, especially with those jurisdictional challenges. Oh, I don't know if I made that call to campus PD. Did I make a call to Dean of Students, Title IX, making sure that we're documenting who those reports were made to and any potential witnesses and any evidence that we have to go along with that documentation. And Victim Connect is a great hotline. There is no stalking hotline. There is not a hotline specifically for victims and survivors of stalking to be able to call. Oftentimes they may call the domestic violence hotline or the RAIN hotline. But if they have not experienced stalking from an intimate partner, if they haven't been sexually assaulted, that might not be intuitive. Victim Connect is another great resource that can get victims of all types of crimes connected to local referrals for resources as well. Just a couple of more resources that I want to point out to you. We have a whole host of campus resources on our website. Again, all of these are free and ready to use for you. So lots of campus resources, regardless of your role on campus. So you can check those out. If you have questions about any of those resources or have difficulty finding those, let me know. You can also order print brochures and posters from us. We understand that budgets are tight on campus, so we will print these brochures and these awareness posters in both English and Spanish and mail those to you completely free of charge. So you can make those requests on our website. Just want to point out one more time that January is National Stalking Awareness Month. We have tons of ready-to-use resources and activity guides and newsletter language and all types of stuff on our website for you to be involved during January for Stalking Awareness Month, as well as the Day of Action. This is a day, January 18th, that we all wear something sparkly, or we use sparkly props, or set up a shiny background and post to social media to spark a dialogue about the dangers of stalking, as well as to bring back the sparkle for all victims and survivors of stalking. So you can check out those resources as well. Point you to our website one more time. That QR code will take you directly there, or you can go to stalkingawareness.org. And this is my contact information. You can get in contact with me directly through my work number or through my email address. If you are looking for resources that you can't find on our website, or if we don't have a resource developed already that would be helpful for you in the work that you're doing, please let me know. We are always looking for new resources to develop to help you in that important work that you are doing. So if we don't have something already developed for you, we will work on getting that developed. So contact me if you have questions, if you want to get involved for January for NSAM, if you have questions about Title IX cases, victims and survivors that you're working with, anything like that, I am here for you. If I don't have the answer, I will get you in contact with someone who does. So again, thank you so much for kicking off this last day with me in this breakout session. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the conference. This conference has been so amazing. So thank you so much to Juliet and to Nora and to everyone else on the team for helping out with this conference and for giving me this space, and for everyone for joining me. Nora, I'll turn it back over to you if you have any last announcements.
Sounds good. I don't think so. Thank you everyone for joining us. And Kendra, I see that a question just came through in the chat or in the Q&A that maybe we can follow, or you can follow up at a later time, which is, has the University of Utah changed anything as a result of this case?
I have some information. I will drop that into the Q&A. You can check out the answer.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.